November 2025, Winnipeg. Mark Carney stands in front of cameras and says something that should terrify every American logistics company from Seattle to Chicago. Western Canadian resources traveled south before they could go anywhere else. That wasn't geography. That was infrastructure designed around American control. We're changing that. He's talking about a railway, a broken, abandoned, supposedly worthless railway that runs 1,300 kilometers through frozen wasteland to reach an Arctic port nobody uses. Except here's what's actually happening. Canada just allocated $262 million to turn that worthless railway into a Class 1 freight corridor, the same standard as the major American lines that have dominated North American logistics for a century. And when it's done, billions of dollars in Western Canadian exports, grain, fertilizer, critical minerals, energy will have a route to European markets that completely bypasses the United States. Not reduces dependence, not diversifies, bypasses entirely. Trump threatened Canadian sovereignty, and Canada's response wasn't a trade war, it was civil engineering. They're building the exit door America never thought they'd use. Let me show you how a railway everyone dismissed as dead infrastructure is about to cost the U.S. billions in lost revenue. For over a century, Western Canada has been America's captive market. Not officially, not legally, but structurally. Saskatchewan produces grain. Manitoba produces fertilizer. Alberta produces energy. Northern Canada has some of the largest critical mineral deposits on Earth, and almost all of it had one path to global markets, south through the United States. Grain went to American ports. Minerals traveled on American railways. Even shipments heading to Europe routed through American infrastructure because that's where the capacity existed. At every step, the United States collected fees. American logistics companies controlled the scheduling. American ports determined the priorities. Canadian exporters paid premiums they couldn't negotiate because there was no alternative. The alternative, technically, was the Hudson Bay Railway. Built in the 1920s and 30s, it was supposed to connect prairie producers directly to European markets through Churchill, a port on the Arctic coast. Ship grain north, bypass American ports entirely, cut weeks off the route to Europe. It never worked. The railway crossed permafrost that shifted seasonally, muskeg that swallowed tracks, extreme cold that cracked steel. The shipping season through Hudson Bay was 4 months maximum. Churchill's port couldn't handle serious volumes. By the 1990s, the Canadian government was so done with it, they sold the entire railway to a private American company called Omnitracks for $1. Not $1 million. $1. That's how worthless this infrastructure was. Omnitracks ran it into the ground. Deferred maintenance, minimal investment. When flooding washed out sections in 2017, they just abandoned it. Churchill was cut off from surface transportation for over a year. In 2018, a consortium of 41 First Nations communities bought it back. Most analysts called it a symbolic gesture, indigenous ownership of infrastructure with no commercial future. But then, Trump happened.
Trump's threats against Canada weren't just rhetoric. They were leverage plays, tariffs, border pressure, economic security justifications for controlling Canadian resources. And Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada governor, former Bank of England governor, now prime minister, looked at a railway everyone had written off and saw something different. A weapon. Not a military weapon, an economic one. Because here's what upgrading the Hudson Bay Railway to Class 1 standards actually means. Heavy freight cars that are currently too heavy for the line can now use it. Unit trains hauling thousands of tons of grain or potash can reach Churchill efficiently. The railway becomes capable of handling the kind of traffic volumes that actually compete with southern routes. And critically, Class 1 standards mean reliability. Companies making long-term logistics decisions need infrastructure that won't fail. So what moves on this railway that justifies $262 million? First, grain. Saskatchewan and Manitoba produce massive volumes of wheat, canola, specialty crops. Almost all of it currently goes through Vancouver or American ports. Churchill offers a significantly shorter route to European markets. Every ton shipped through Churchill is a ton not generating fees for American ports. Second, potash. Saskatchewan dominates global potash production. Currently, most of it travels through American logistics networks. Genesis Fertilizers has already signed agreements to route shipments through Churchill. Heavy potash loads can now move efficiently on upgraded track. Third, critical minerals. Northern Canada has massive deposits of nickel, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements. Getting them to market has been prohibitively expensive because of infrastructure limits. Churchill changes the economics completely. Mine operators can ship bulk minerals directly to European refineries without routing through American facilities. The Arctic Gateway Group, the consortium that owns the railway, has already built critical mineral storage at Churchill and shipped to Europe for 2 consecutive seasons. This isn't theoretical. Fourth, energy. Alberta has proposed an energy corridor to Churchill, liquefied natural gas, hydrogen as ammonia, potentially electricity transmission. If built, Western Canadian energy reaches European and Asian markets without touching American infrastructure. Added up, tens of millions of tons annually flowing through infrastructure that completely bypasses American control. Now, the U.S. doesn't lose every shipment. Some routes will always use southern infrastructure. Vancouver remains crucial for Pacific markets, and certain destinations are still faster through American ports. But here's what changes. For the first time in a century, American routes become optional instead of mandatory. Saskatchewan grain producers now have a choice: ship through American ports and pay premiums, or route through Churchill with shorter distances to Europe and no American intermediaries. Once companies discover the economics work, they don't switch back just because American ports offer discounts. Every ton of potash, every mineral shipment, every unit of energy that shifts to Churchill is revenue American companies no longer collect. Port fees, railway charges, logistics premiums, storage costs. The entire American transportation industry in border states has profited from Canadian dependence for over a century. That profit stream is about to shrink substantially. And here's the beautiful part for Canada. There's nothing the United States can do to prevent it. This isn't a tariff they can retaliate against. It's not a trade dispute they can bring to international arbitration. It's Canada investing in its own infrastructure and choosing to route Canadian products through Canadian territory. Trump can threaten all he wants, but he can't stop a railway upgrade in Manitoba. He can't prevent grain from shipping through Churchill. He can't force Canadian companies to use American logistics if they have better alternatives. But wait, if this railway is so valuable, why has it failed for 90 years? Permafrost. The northern sections cross terrain where the ground is permanently frozen, except permanent is misleading. Permafrost shifts with seasonal temperature changes and is increasingly unstable due to climate change. Traditional railway construction doesn't work. Lay track on permafrost and it buckles. Sinkholes appear. Sections wash out. Maintenance costs become astronomical. Arctic Gateway Group solved this with technology that didn't exist when the railway was built. Ground-penetrating radar maps subsurface conditions. LiDAR creates three-dimensional track models. Drones conduct regular inspections. GPS-tracked maintenance schedules work systematically instead of reactively. Land-based sensors monitor ground movement continuously, and artificial intelligence analyzes all the data to predict where problems will develop before track fails. This isn't maintenance, it's predictive infrastructure management. The result, the Hudson Bay Railway is now in the best condition it's been in 30 years, despite crossing terrain that destroyed previous track. And ironically, climate change is helping. The shipping season through Hudson Bay is extending as ice coverage decreases. What was historically 4 months is now approaching 5 or 6. With icebreaker support, year-round operations become possible. The combination of upgraded track standards, advanced monitoring, and longer shipping seasons means the fundamental economics have shifted. What was marginally viable 90 years ago is genuinely competitive today. This is about more than railways and ports. It's about Canada demonstrating that American infrastructure isn't indispensable. For generations, Western Canadian exports depended on American routes because no alternatives existed. That dependence gave America leverage. Trump's tariff threats didn't make Canada weaker, they made alternatives economically compelling. $262 million for a railway through muskeg and permafrost looks insane until you realize it eliminates billions in payments to American logistics companies and removes American leverage over Canadian trade. Every grain shipment through Churchill instead of American ports is proof that Canadian companies can function independently. Every mineral export that bypasses American refineries demonstrates that supply chains work without American intermediation. Every dollar invested in northern infrastructure is a dollar reducing future American leverage. And this isn't just about Canada. Other countries are watching. If Canada can successfully build trade infrastructure that bypasses American control, why can't they? The precedent matters far beyond this specific railway. The Hudson Bay Railway, the infrastructure failure everyone dismissed as a historical artifact, is becoming the corridor that proves Canadian independence isn't just rhetoric, it's infrastructure being built, operated, and used to move billions in trade without American permission. Trump wanted to demonstrate that Canada had nowhere else to go. Instead, he gave Canada the motivation to go north.
literally, to invest in infrastructure that everyone knew existed but nobody thought was worth making functional. $262 million buys a lot more than railway upgrades. It buys optionality, the ability to choose routes based on economics rather than necessity. It buys strategic independence, controlling your own supply chains instead of depending on someone else's. American logistics companies in border states are watching the tonnage projections and doing the math. The grain that used to flow south, the minerals that used to route through American facilities, the fees and charges and premiums that added up to billions annually. All of it potentially shifting to a railway that runs north to Churchill, then directly across the ocean to European markets, bypassing American infrastructure entirely. And there's nothing Washington can do except watch the trade they assumed was locked in place find a different route. The Hudson Bay Railway isn't just connecting the prairies to the Arctic coast, it's connecting Canadian independence to European markets. And it's proving that when you threaten an ally's sovereignty, they don't just fight back, they build alternatives you never saw coming.